Brian Greene, what's up, man?
Good morning.
Good morning. How's it going?
Fantastic. Beautiful
Yeah,
morning in San Francisco.
nice. But that's not where you're from, right?
No, I live in the land of the cornfields. I live in the middle of the United States, right near the Mississippi River.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's it's quite a big swath of area. So,
Yeah, no, I live in a very rural, good thing for high-speed internet because I live in the middle of nowhere, and I've been a telecommuter since 2005. So I was work from home long before we talked about work from home as an issue.
oh wow, we'll have to get into that. Actually, I'm always curious about people who are successful in tech who have been in the industry for a long time, but live in a um, I guess non-conventional areas. So,
Love to talk
but yeah,
about that.
yeah,
Selling it now is a lot easier. It's like
huh.
it's like a weird COVID benefit is that, working from home and being remote and whatever, like people understand it now. Um, 10 years ago, you just make a simple deal. Hey, listen, I know you're not into this remote thing. You want to know that I'm real? Great. I will come to wherever you want me to come for 1 week out of every month.
Yeah.
That's been my deal. You tell me where you want me to go. 1 week out of every month, I'll go to where the problem is. And at the time, when I started this, I was working for a Fortune 500 at locations all over the world. There was no, they were just going to fly you from project to project anyway. There were more people working from home back then, I think, than people realize.
That's true. Are you by a airport, or is it kind of a haul to get to one?
I'm about half an hour from a little regional.
Oh, that ain't bad at all. Then that's a
Yeah,
perfect setup.
you can get anywhere pretty easy now.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Like I live in Salt Lake City, and even then, people kind of look at me cross-eyed, like, "Are you? Where's that? Is that a city?" Like,
Right.
skeptically, especially when you go overseas, people are like, "I have no idea where that is." Like, how far is that from New York? And like,
Right.
so it's a ways, but yeah, it is interesting for sure. But if you'd been working, kind of doing the road warrior thing forever, yeah, I mean, everyone I know, it's like, what's the big deal? Remote. So I don't know.
It's, I mean, it's allowed me to have a very different life. I have 5 children. They've never had
Oh,
to relocate across multiple jobs and multiple roles and promotions. I've never had to upset my family, right? And that's been a big deal over the course of a career. I think early on it was work remote. Hey, this will be cool and convenient. It was sort of a bunch of reasons why we needed to make it work. And then later, I kind of look back and say, wow, I've had more time with my kids because of it.
hmm.
It's not daytime. It's, my work day is done. I'm immediately at home rather than I don't have to sell that to anybody, right?
Right, right. Yeah, except the poor saps listening to this podcast on their 2 hour commute one way.
Sorry.
But sorry about that. Yeah, I've worked remote for a long time too, but I've always made it a point to kind of balance, like, close geography with the things I'd like to do versus compromising on that. So I've had countless offers to come to the Bay Area and go work, and I'm just like, I can't do it. It's no way. So no offense to the people there. Love your town. Love you guys. Actually, I don't really love your town at all, but it's fine. So, but yeah. So I think we've interacted a ton on the LinkedIn. Big fan of your posts. You tend to, I think, come at things from, I would say, a unique angle, right? Because you're a software engineer who's been working in data for a really, really long time, and I think you have a perspective that I think you'd obviously like to share in this podcast. But yeah, walk me through kind of like how did you get to today, and what's been motivating you?
All right. I think I can do like career in a nutshell really quick.
Okay.
I've been practicing this. Um, it took me a long time to figure out maybe what I was chasing. I don't know. So I started traditional computer science major, math minor, graduated from university right after the dot-com crash, so like 2003. Really lousy time to be trying to find a job as an entry-level software engineer. I lucked out, got a great gig at a company, little tiny division, and we're building web apps and stuff, and transactional stuff. And it didn't take me long and that was fun, right? But it didn't take me long to figure out that the managers never wanted to see the screens in the apps. They only wanted to talk to the dude in the corner who wrote reports with SQL. As a matter of fact, all the important people only went to his desk. which was interesting because I learned a bunch of SQL and relational database design theory in school and whatever. But the idea of like reporting as a discipline just seemed kind of trite, to be honest. And went over there. His name's Tony, and I got used to talking to Tony and understanding, and really began to understand. Like, I don't know why it was such an epiphany, right? But like the data is the only thing that's important. This is what this is where all the decisions are going to be made. The data in aggregate, right? And it's this clear distinction between I've been building these transactional things that enable the business process. They enable people to move widgets. They enable people to move tasks down the line, right? But in aggregate, looking at those tasks, in aggregate, looking at those decisions, you can see the heartbeat of the company. You can see how things work, right? Like that's where you're going to make all your real decisions. Well, I got to go do data. Became fascinated with it, started reading books on BI, ended up starting a BI team, built a little BI team. We did global sales across like 30 some ERPs. At the time, we could get 24 hours of latency, which was pretty impressive. Product level granularity, global sales in a Fortune 500. And like, I still remember at the time the executives had BlackBerry Pearls.
Oh, I remember those. I had one.
Yeah. The email that went out to the executives every morning on the money, on the time clock with the daily sales numbers from the day before was handcrafted HTML and CSS so it would perfectly fit on the screen.
Wow.
If they didn't get their daily sales numbers, there was going to be a problem. Right. And so watching that, it was great. It learned a ton, but it was really slow. Like 24 hours of latency just seemed like and I look back now and I'm like, wow, no, we were doing pretty well.
Back then that was really good.
Yeah, no, we were doing pretty good, but it wasn't fast enough. And I got the opportunity to see Gregor Hopi speak at theserverside.com in Las Vegas. I sat in the front row, this crazy haired guy, and he's talking about enterprise service buses and event-driven architecture and message-driven systems. And I was wrapped, man. Jaw on the floor. This is what I've really been trying to figure out. Went, bought the book, read Enterprise, and it was fascinating, ranting to people about this is what we should be looking at. Because at the time, everybody's just shipping files around, right? I mean, we got lots of FTP action going or SFTP action going on, lots of mounted file shares and kind of things, lots of linked databases, right? Like ERP guys love linked databases. Talking about query federation, right? And like, is query federation a good idea? We've known how to do query federation for a really, really long time, but we don't do it at scale hardly anywhere.
Right.
Wonder why. But anyway, I'm looking at this message-driven thing, and I got pulled into this huge project to scope out their BI work. And as I'm digging into it, I figured out, you need a service bus. And this legitimately wasn't like resume-driven development. They had a very complicated problem. The way we were contemplating integration wasn't going to work. I said, hey, let's go build this middleware thing. Let's go do event-driven. So we hooked up 250 endpoints in the next like 24-ish months across ERPs and MES systems and calibration systems in multiple data centers around the world. And it was, low latency transaction level stuff to make a manufacturing plant run, right? So it was really kind of the opposite of what we talk about as data integration, right? Very much just lots of messages on the wire. One of the coolest, weird little pieces of software we built right there, by the way, was a wiretap that sat in the middle that sucked all the variations of XML off the wire and dumped them all into a database. You hear people arguing and discussing like, how do we do this now with JSON? But like we developed a really neat pattern for how to sniff this high velocity stream of XML, all the schemas you can imagine. How do you turn that into something useful on the back end using we just use SQL Server. It's not that hard, right? Like it's not like you can do it. Fascinating stuff. I had done some master data integration, master data management along the way. Little companies don't talk about MDM very much, and it hurts them a lot. Like I think if MDM was studied as a discipline earlier, if everybody said, hey, listen, we should talk about customer, vendor, product, location, right? Chart of accounts, which nobody thinks about, but in any kind of company, chart of accounts is super important. There's a handful of these master data entities. If you go talk to the boring people, the ERP people, they'll tell you, hey, unless you have these understood, you can't do anything.
Right.
Full stop. You can't run end-to-end business processes if you don't understand these basic entities. So I'd done a bunch of that. I got into a bigger thing doing that, and then did a bunch of enterprise architecture. We had 1,500 running applications globally. How do you figure out where the redundancy is? How do you figure out which one you're going to turn off? This isn't, it gets really complicated when you have 7 or 8 or 9 CRMs, but they're from different vendors and they have different plugins. And so they're legitimately like, you can put them all in the bucket of CRM, but they're doing different things, right? Figuring out how to do consolidation, how to take this one CRM, break half of it, take half of its functionality, put it in the other one, take the other half and go dump it in here. Like figuring out app rationalization at scale is fun. There's no coding involved for me at that point. And after a couple of years, I said, wow, I don't know, midlife crisis or whatever. I got to go write some code. I've been doing these like building teams and building capabilities inside of Fortune 500 for a while. Let's go do a startup. So, you mentioned San Francisco. I like this city, but I want to live here. So I started traveling out here once a month in 2016 for a startup, built a data platform for a surgical robotics company. Surgical robots make lots of data. At the time, they only had one robot. Internally, though, we had a couple, right? There's a whole pipeline of products. And so it was try to build a data platform that is going to allow this multi-tenancy as the company grows and as we spin these other product lines off, right? So we spent some years building that. We were acquired by Johnson & Johnson. It was a great exit. I think it was the largest exit in medtech history. It was $3.7 billion in cash up front.
Damn.
Yeah, it was pretty good. I still have to work, right? Like I was pretty far down on the totem pole, right? So, but it was. I think it was good for everybody there. Really, it was kind of amazing how well that went out. Stayed in J&J for about 18 months, and then fall of 2020. It's a pandemic. It's Q4. Probably should start a startup. Seems like the perfect timing, right? I've never done it before, right? Like we're fully distributed. I'm a dude from the Midwest. Yeah, it's going to be great. And so we started Neuronsphere in October 2020. We raised some money from friends and family. We built a product. We sold it to some people, all in kind of a really cool experience. So that brings me to today. We're like 2.5 years into our little company, and maybe we're going to sell it to somebody. Maybe we're going to keep going. Who knows? Future is always uncertain.
That's really interesting. I mean, I've done startups too. I've worked at startups and started startups, and it's definitely a journey. I mean, what was it like making the jump from having a 9 to 5 to deciding, hey, let's do a startup? I mean, it sounds like a fun COVID project, but you got to be slightly insane to want to do this kind of thing. Like, what was the trigger for wanting to do a startup?
It's going to sound naive, right?
There are no right or wrong answers here, by the way.
Yeah, no. So a couple of things. Yeah. So I kind of had this belief, right? Like if you're going to go start a thing, you should seed that on what feels like a unique idea. The challenge for me is I've read a ton of books about computer stuff. I've worked in multiple different aspects of the industry, feeling like I had a truly unique. It turns out you don't need a unique idea to start a startup. It has nothing to do with it. Just so all your listeners are clear, this is not a rational prerequisite, but it was certainly mine. I had been dancing, as I worked between all these different, the common thread in my career is data, and from 87 different directions. And I've been dancing with some ideas that go all the way back to my very first gig. And my very first gig, when I was trying to figure out how to do applications and reporting stuff, it became very clear to me, and I didn't know about dimensional model or anything, but it became, you remember sentence diagramming in school, nouns and verbs and things?
Yep.
It sort of illuminated like, hey, I'm talking to these people and they keep asking for reports, but if you listen carefully to their words, they're almost giving you the query. Right? If I could get them to just tweak their words a little bit more carefully, like almost generate and this idea of the semantic that we use and how does that map into the data and how close can it be? I've been dancing with that idea my whole career. in a bunch of different ways. And I had what I thought was a unique insight. And so, there's no time like the present. It was not great timing, but okay, we have a unique idea. We think we understand the target market. We think we understand the buyer. And, it was kind of interesting because like 1 week into it, I mean, I didn't start it with strangers. I started with some folks that I've known for years. One of the guys, like I've worked with this dude. I think I've hired him 5 times over 15 years.
Oh, wow.
One of the other dudes, this is the 3rd or 4th time I've hired him over the last 10 years. I've known Kevin, my partner, the CEO, for 12 or 15 years. Known all these across multiple roles. We can all complete each other's sentences. We were 2 weeks in and having a daily call. We had goal tracking set up. We had source control set up. We had CI/CD set up 2 weeks in. Damn. We were building our initial CLIs. We had some architecture drawings architecture drawings as code in the repo. Like you can go look right now in the core Arch docs repo and still find like current docs. It's where we log architecture decisions. It was like going to work. We'd all been working remotely for years, right? Like these are all guys who've managed and been on remote team. Alex has been remote forever. Jim's been remote. So in some ways it was not, you know what I mean? Like day-to-day activities for the engineers and for building code, for building things the way we wanted to build them. Very straightforward, right? If anything, it was just, we're just going to keep doing things the way we think they ought to be done. It's been very successful in the past. Let's go do it again.
How critical was, I guess, your experience with, the rest of your team in, I guess, hitting the ground running like that? Because that seems highly unusual for a startup where you would just sort of have everything clicking in about 2 weeks. Is it just because you guys had a good rapport and you said you could finish each other's sentences? Like, I guess so. Was it just at that level of trust and I guess knowing each other's flow that helped in that?
Yeah, we've built systems for years. I mean, when we started the startup, the 4 of us were all working together and we all gave notice on the same day and off we went. We all, yeah, I feel, I mean, and to give people this is an interesting little sort of sub story, right? My partner, Kevin, he's our CEO. We had to Google for like, what do you do if a bunch of you are quitting at the same time? Like, I don't even know what the protocol is for that. You don't want to be a jerk about it, right? Like, it's kind of a big deal that the director of data and his principal architect and 2 other lead engineers are all leaving. It seems like there's something we should do about this. And then the right answer is that the highest person on the totem pole goes to their boss and tells them, like, does that for everybody.
Yeah.
The challenge is, I don't want to tell too much of his story, right? But like Kevin and his boss they were friends. They had worked together in previous roles. His boss had brought him in. He was a mentor. I know the guy's a good dude. My partner's like racked with anxiety that morning. Like, how am I going to do this? Like, we want to do this. We need to go do this, but I don't know how to go tell this dude that we're quitting. And it went okay. It must have went reasonably okay because later that dude became one of our investors. Like, actually, that was his response was, it sucks that y'all are leaving. What are you doing? Like, are you looking for investment? Because I invest in startups. We should talk maybe, after you guys are clear. So it actually was kind of interesting. He continues to be a mentor. It all works out, right?
Sounds like a cool boss.
He's a really cool guy.
Yeah.
He's from France. Am I explain? I don't know how much that explains, but he's got a definitely slightly different take on businesses and how they run.
That's super cool.
So it's rare to start a startup that way, in that we all know each other. We know, I've been building software teams in various domains for a long time. I've built several of them with these gentlemen. So they know how we think about, right? Like, we have this very collective set of beliefs. And yeah, it allowed us to go very, very fast. Very, very fast. Like I don't have anything to benchmark, right? Like others start, you don't get to peek behind the covers, but it allowed us to build a lot of code that we are really proud of very, very quickly.
That's awesome. So, so you mentioned, I guess the notion of a unique idea, but how much do you think if you were to make a trade of unique idea versus strong team dynamics, which would you pick? Or
Strong team.
strong team. Yeah.
I would take my team right now with a mediocre idea and smoke most other people. Like if you've got a really good team of engineers and you really have flow in your development process, you really know how to like the uniqueness of the problem or the uniqueness of the solution, right? Like there's plenty of examples of actually a suboptimal solution being the thing that won in the market. So the uniqueness of the idea, it's an interesting lesson learned for me.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. It's it's having done startups too. I think one of the things is you have to have each other's back, right? And so there's just a level of trust that comes with that. And the moment you start bringing on other employees, you start introducing I guess different variables into the equation that I guess have the probability of a coin flip of either working out or not. Like hiring super hard, for example, I think, and people that you think might be a good hire might end up down the road something happens. I don't know. So then, so it's a question too of like bring on a new person if they gel with that dynamic that you had, with the original team there, right? Because at some point, the incentive is to grow the team, obviously, unless you intend to keep it small, and then but it's like finding those people who are going to fit that culture that you all have established is, at least I personally found to be occasionally quite tricky. So
I think I don't know what to say, we cheated there, but we might have a little bit, at least for a while. So I spent a large part of my early career, I worked through a ton of those roles at a company called Stryker. It's a Fortune 500 medical device company. Most of our staff at one point or another passed through there.
Okay.
And if you dig deeper into them as a company, one of the things that they're kind of well known for is a deep common culture. They hire for it, like they aggressively screen for it at interviewing time, better than almost anybody I've ever seen. And so if you go in there and perform well, there are a bunch of like baseline attributes that you could just sort of, like I know this, like I have a reasonably strong belief, right? Because of this shared history. Additionally, I don't know, I've been building teams for a long time. My partner has been building teams for a long time, longer than me, and has built a bunch of them over his career. You'd probably know 5 or 10 people that you remember. And if you're doing something cool, you just start calling them up, right? Like, so we continued to hire, even after that first 4, we continued to just hire in network.
Oh, wow.
We had a stacked ranked list between the two of us. So here's all the people we know that we would go get back in order. Let's go pluck them out of wherever they are as soon as we can afford to and build the dream team.
Wow.
And so if you've managed enough people and enough teams over the right, like, shouldn't you know, like I know 10 people that if you gave me a big enough pile of money, I could get all of them assembled. And so, hiring strangers is a huge risk.
Yeah.
Hiring anybody that one of your deeply trusted staff says, I'll put my name on this person, they're one of us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right. And that was the bar, right? So we hired people that we didn't personally know, but not without that.
Right.
Right. And the person doing that vetting is somebody that we've known for 20 years. Right. So you're right. It's all about trust and relationship. And we took advantage of some unique cheat codes with common history and a common company that's, huge. Zillions of employees, they have massive development organization, right? So like just the opportunity to know that many people that do these different things.
Yeah, that is a good cheat code. Yeah, that's an awesome cheat code. Yeah, especially if you work at a company that, like you say, has a high bar, right? And you kind of know what that criteria are, then it's like, that makes it a ton easier. Because if that's the same culture you're trying to hire for at your company, then and the question I always ask people too, when they bring a candidate is, would you bet your job on this person? Because I damn well will take this into account, and you should do. It tends to make people, I think, highly consider who they would want to bring to the table. It's kind of like a punch pass. Like you could bring 100 people to the table, and the thing is, like, some people just ain't going to work out. That's just a fact. Like, life happens and things happen, and I've had people that were seemingly awesome, for a while, and then just something happened in their life, and then something changed, and that's how it is. But for the most part, that's a wonderful cheat code. So yeah, for the audience out there, yeah, I mean, look to your network to build your team if you can. It's an invaluable resource. I think cold hiring, especially kind of what happened in the last couple of years, where companies were on a kind of a hiring binge. That's, you kind of see the consequences of how that plays out too right now, and it's sometimes ain't pretty. So
when we were building the middleware team, we had multiple large consulting companies tell us that what we were trying to do was undoable on the timeline that we were trying to do it. And we got the dev team on the ground, and we got the delivery process kind of ironed out. It took 6 or 8 months to really get it ironed out. It was brutal, absolutely brutal. We missed delivery on some stuff really early on and caused some delays. And I was like, every day you call in 3 times a day to give status on how things are going. Like when you get to this intense level of the end of delivery, and everybody just says, red, yellow, green, right? My last name's Greene. But man, Greene was yellow a lot, like to the extent that like when I gave my status, they were like, oh, Greene is yellow again, right? And I'm like, no, dude, Greene is green, finally. People said, I got a box, a gift package of just yellow stuff, yellow crayons, a yellow t-shirt, right? Like from a project manager on the other side of the planet. So it started a tad rocky. When we got it dialed in, every week I'd have my one-on-one with the program director. And this is rare. You never get this. I've never had this since. Every time when I met this guy, he would say, hey man, do you need more staff? Do you need more money? That was it. Just blank. Because if you need either one of these things, you ask and I'll make that happen for you, right? Like time, cost, scope, quality being your main drivers of delivery. If the time is absolutely fixed, then you better have people running the show that understand that cost and scope are variable. And he absolutely understood cost was right. Like, I'll throw money and people at this. We quickly got to a point where the answer was, I don't need or want more developers. But I definitely could use another analyst who can run through the transactional work of gathering all the requirements for the next set of integrations. Remember, I said we did like 250 of them.
Yeah.
Now, once you have that kind of assembly line running, that also changes your hiring dynamic and like what you can do with cold people, right? Because so much of the process can be well defined. It's actually easier to train people, right? And so you can sort of, again, use process to kind of cheat code to scale, because we were able to scale up pretty aggressively after that. But it was only getting everything really dialed in.
How do you know you have the process right and dialed?
Measure it, right? Like you only get what you measure, and it doesn't have to be crazy or formal. Like it can be pretty easy. Do we release code every day? I love the Dora metrics, right? Like how often can you release code to production? How often can you roll through multiple environments? Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of things that we like to see happening daily. And when we get those things all happening daily, then we start honing on different parts of the process. But there's a bunch of things that like every developer should be pushing code to trunk every day. Like there's days you won't, but for the most part, like if you didn't push it to trunk, it's not real. I don't care about what works on your laptop.
Right.
Right. So it's, like when you drop that thing, I legitimately I had a boss one time who came back to the office and says, hey, I now know how to run over your laptop accidentally with the rental car. 3 guys traveling together. It's late. They're in the parking garage, pile of luggage on the cart, laptop bag falls off, bounces under. Nobody notices it. Throw the thing in reverse because they're late. Clank. Anything that's on your computer is subject to be lost at any moment. you could run it over with a car accidentally. So developers are pushing code every day. And every push is generating, documentation, is generating tests, and ideally generating deployments. Like, it's not real until it's working somewhere.
Right.
If you get those things right, like for me, that getting a bunch of these kind of basic things on the delivery side done, then you can start measuring the bigger process impediment. You know what I mean?
Interesting. One of the things we were talking about before we started recording was this intersection between, or maybe it's more of a gap, really, I think, in your opinion, really, between software engineering and data engineering. I think this is a good segue into that, deployment practices and so forth. I mean, walk me through this, because it seems like this is something you've been kind of, I don't know, eats at you. I don't know. Maybe it's not that passionate, but
no, I'm pretty passionate about this one. This one's got. I didn't realize that this would like comprise part of my life's work when I started doing this. When I started doing it, I was just really mad about something. So when I took over my first, kind of management gig, let's go build a team, let's go build a BI platform. We were, there was an existing platform on Cognos and Oracle, and we were porting it to a Microsoft BI stack. So analysis services, SSIS, the whole ball of wax, right? So we got to go look at all this existing code. And there's a bunch of like cron jobs calling Perl scripts to create templated SQL, right? Like old school. Hey, it worked. They were getting the same 24 hours of latency that we got to, right?
Sure.
With a tiny little dev team. I think it's only in retrospect that I started figuring out, like, the software engineering, we spend all this time like making tools for developers and having good delivery processes, et cetera. But the roots of data engineering are tools that we made for DBAs, right? They're tools that we made for data transfer folks. And they were very explicitly, even from the beginning, not in the software teams. Like when I think about where I started this, right? Like when we ported this, part of why we were doing the port was because the team that was supporting it wasn't in IT. You hear about this all the time, right? Like the shadow IT team in marketing built an X, Y, or Z, or the folks in R&D built the blah, 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 right? And you can have governance discussions back and forth, but ultimately those tools tended to be less focused towards technical people and less focused on the kinds of things that we like to do when we deliver software. And so I begin to bring software engineers in to say, hey, let's go do this data thing, right? Like it's just an analysis service cube. It's just OLAP. It's not, right? Like you can learn this. The next thing we ask is, well, how do you deploy it? Well, you open Visual Studio, right? And you right click deploy. No, you will not ever do that. Not on my team, you won't. No developer's machine should connect to prod, full stop. If it doesn't deploy out of source control, we're
right.
Not having a conversation. And, we're talking to like the Microsoft professionals, air quotes there. And they're like, no. Lots of companies, what they have is a dedicated build machine, and they just leave that machine over in the corner. And nobody uses that one except for doing deployments and stuff. Okay, this is not going to work for me. So we built tools and wrappers and adapters so that we could do CI/CD with analysis services and SSIS and reporting services. We had full multi-environment deployments. You push code, it went where it was supposed to go. And this included things like taking the analysis services cube definition file and ripping through the XML with a tool to go find the connection strings that it just saved directly into the XML and ripping them out and replacing them with the environment specific ones so that you didn't ever do that in Visual Studio, right? And so we built a whole series of wrappers and little command line tools at the time, PowerShell guys, because it was kind of cool, and radically nailed delivery. And that honestly felt really natural to me. Like when we got those tools to be able to behave like we were used to the rest of our software engineering, because again, like we're writing custom C# stuff. There's real, air quotes, real code in here. I've got to go build libraries somewhere, right? Like I need a bunch of software engineering practices. If I'm going to go do Spark, I might be bringing in other jar files, right? Like I need an entire Java software management infrastructure if I'm going to go use and extend an engine that's based on that. So this, why not bring software and continue to push software practices into data has been, I don't know, I guess it seemed very natural to me. When we got to Oris, we really went whole hog with it. It was a I don't know, there's n environments for m number of tenants, and can a developer have their own environment, and how do we do change control, right? I mean, when you're doing medical robots, change control and verification, that's another thing, right? Like, there's a lot of people out there with just a database and they're just working in prod, just rock and roll. And that's fun and everything. But, if you're going to maintain any kind of security certification, if you're going to maintain any kind of, you talk about how do you measure process control, if you're going to follow any basic change control process, right? Like, go old school, go ITIL change control, right? Like, the idea of look at a change, scope it out, do an impact analysis, test the change, apply the change, verify that the change, right? Like, those basic steps of delivery, I guess I've always worked within those constraints, right? And so you can prototype a lot of stuff. Like, you can do a lot of stuff with just one environment. But I think the best quote I've read recently on the subject was on Reddit. Everybody has a test environment. Some people also have a separate production environment.
Boy.
But like this, so the idea of, I'm going to push some code and then it's going to go get tested, right? Like, it's going to go deploy itself to some test environment. It's going to run against known test data. Some tests are going to happen. And then that chunk of code is going to get marked as releasable and promotable. This seems very straightforward to me. It's how we manage massive amounts of software. In the data engineering space, like, usually what passes for this is, hey, we figured out how to make our tool directly read from a Git branch. That solves less problems than you think, like, on its own, right? There's a lot of process you're trying to do well beyond that. So bringing software engineering towards all of these data tools, and really, I mean, it's been the focus of the last 2.5 years, the focus of our startup. It worked pretty well. We were able to really do it at scale at Oris. Figuring out how to do it again, sort of with a better twist. It seems very natural to me now. And so it's fun to watch, sort of, but I think most data analytics people, or not most, but many, don't come in through the path that we came in through. So I came in through software. If you come in through business analysis, right? Like, you come in through, I was a consumer of dashboards, and then I learned how to customize dashboards, and then somebody showed me the SQL behind it, and I learned how to start playing with the where clause. And right, like, lots of people come into analytics from that perspective. And at that point, I mean, I think it's kind of on the vendors for not just instilling better practices. And, it's hard. It's harder to do some of those things, but they feel like they pay off pretty fast in terms of delivery velocity. And, there's a lot of talk. People are like, do I trust the data? Do I trust what the platform's doing? And I'm like, I don't know. Do you test it?
Right.
Right. Like, have you seen it do what it's supposed to do before? Because computers are weird. They do the same thing over and over again, right? But if you're testing it in prod, then, like, yeah, I get it. You might not have faith in your system. But I don't know that that's we're not going to solve that with, like, more and more interesting technology to look at your Git repo, right? Like, we solve that by just doing things that have worked well before, which is figuring out processes for blast radius control.
It's interesting because I do comment on this quite a bit, but it feels like the data world is maybe like 10, 15 years behind where software is. And I always say, if you want to know the future of data engineering, just look at where software's been. And, for a while, really.
Are we talking about data contracts now?
That's definitely one of them, right? And I feel, because my software engineering friends, they look at contracts and like, yeah, I mean, we've been doing that for a while, and for full disclosure too, like, I friends with Chad Sanderson, invested in his company and stuff, and I believe that what he's doing is a good thing, but at the same time, that's definitely one example of that for sure. And let me see, data ops, observability, reliability, all this kind of stuff, right? It's just stuff that's it's been kind of table stakes in software for ages, right? And data, people are like, wow, look at I kind of had this quip where if you wanted to kind of understand the data landscape, you would just take you know, I don't know, a book on software engineering and just do a find and replace for, dev or software and just replace it with data. And then you would have basically a whole bunch of businesses you could do or startups you could raise a bunch of money for. So it's like,
it is that sounds more than familiar for what it's worth.
Mm-hmm. Happens.
Yeah. So. I think there's a lot of, I think what's challenging to see is that you're right. And through a combination of marketing and entropy, I don't know. I think what we see is a recycling sometimes between software and data.
Yeah.
But we like recycle the cool hype, but not the learnings that we got from 5 years later. Right? So like XML schema, right? You ever look at an XML schema, like a really good one? I mean, a lot of people are allergic to XML. It's really pointy on the edges, and so a lot of people swallow it. But like it's tolerable with milk. If you look at XML schema as a concept, it's one of the most well-defined data validation. Like, it is amazing what you can declare and what those people thought through. At the height of insanity, nobody did it. Nobody. Right? As a matter of fact, the first thing you do on a production endpoint with real traffic is turn off schema validation. I've got a bunch of trusted people sending me input, and we are not going to eat the CPU. Right? So this idea, so we've done and we did this. I mean, we do this in ETL tools. Mm-hmm. Right? Like ETL tools you can take an ETL tool and do column level checks as the row flashes through memory. Who does that? Nobody. It's not efficient, right? Like, that's not where you do that kind of work. You can, but it's just not, computationally efficient, right? So I think there's other examples in the data space where we're talking a lot about like these new ideas, but they're not new. They're really good ideas, but they have to be used. It's a little bit like medicine, right? Like, you take it as needed, not eat the whole bottle.
Right.
Your headache's not going to go away extra good if you eat 30 Tylenol. No. Just one is good. I get it that there's a whole bottle there, but we don't need all of it. And I feel there's a bunch of technology that, if you take like 60 or 70% of it and then pause, you can avoid getting burned by a bunch of the rest of it. So as I look at software practices moving into data, that's the thing that's always in the back of my head is, did we look at where we stole this from, and then look at where those people ended up, and can we figure out how to not get to the same place, right? Like, can we figure out how to get more of the juice with less of the squeeze?
Oh, for sure. It's something I've been cognizant of as I've been, working on my new book on data modeling. I've been referring back to the entire history of information as an industry, and that includes data and obviously software, and just sort of understanding what have been the patterns we've gone through over the decades, really. And it's an interesting exercise to go through if you have all the time in the world to do such a thing. But it's I'm starting to come to the opinion that I feel like we need to view things more as a life cycle, and basically a process map versus this distinction between software and data, for instance, especially as data moves faster and faster. I feel like everything that's upstream, so I guess that it is applications, really we should be adopting those practices all the way through the life cycle, because otherwise you start getting these weird, I think almost unnecessary practices. And I think this is probably the fault of kind of historically where we've been as an industry, where we've had, I think, maybe a false dichotomy between engineering and data that maybe doesn't need to be there. I think as you're pointing out, a lot of these practices can and probably should just be appropriated through the whole life cycle. So, I
mean, look, SaaS has made this worse. Silicon Valley in the last 10 years of SaaSes have actually really exacerbated this problem. And you can make a lot of money selling a software package that does like 2 interesting things or 3 interesting things. And the strongest selling point for, I don't know, 15 years now, but the real strongest selling point in the last decade for all these SaaSes is it's so easy you don't need IT. Right? So the problem starts upstream. Like we talk a lot about we should go get those app folks to do what we need. But tons of your air quotes app teams aren't your software. They're CRMs and ERPs and PLMs and all these other systems, which are, I mean, frankly, amazing. The ability to do highly configurable software, point and click in a web browser, add flex fields and validation. Like you can be insanely productive in Salesforce. You can develop, like you could never hand build a web app that fast, right? Like you can do great stuff, but it doesn't mean you don't need data architecture. It doesn't mean you don't need people that aren't thinking about business process, right? You talk about how does process tie to data. When we built middleware, every integration, talks about what's on each end of it. There's a business process that is connecting 2 systems. Yep. And the only reason we're having a discussion is that process will be more efficient if we connect these 2 systems. And we had a whole map that was system houses data, right? So system houses information element, and multiple systems can house the same information element. And then processes use systems. And so at some point you end up with, I have a process that uses these 2 systems to complete its work. We must create a bridge between them. Here are the data elements that are required at the front of the process. They start in this system, ergo they must end in the other to complete. Using that, so we built that process map and that integration map for an entire manufacturing facility, and then used it to drive the testing strategy for how we lit the entire thing up. And I mean, it was a 3-week effort, like bringing an oil refinery online. 600 people in an ISO 10,000 rated clean room making brain implants, and, a dozen pieces of software in incredible concert, right? Like getting that to just come online and testing all of these different processes. So here's one. If you work in any kind of manufacturing company and you want to figure out where things are, go find the new product introduction workflow. Because from the conception of the idea of a product in marketing, from the voice of the customer, through refining it into engineering and putting it in the PLM, through getting contract manufacturers and component parts, and what are we going to in-house and what are we going to have somebody else build, and how do we get manufacturing to make it? How do we get it through logistics? How do we sell it to the customer? Are we paying different taxes in different companies? How does the customer return it if they don't like it? Don't forget return logistics. How do I do that for one new SKU? How do the sales reps sell it? Where do they find their marketing? For one master data item, we'll go all the way back to master data. Why is master data important? The most critical master data process that is end-to-end for many manufacturers. Go find new product introduction. What do I have to do to get a product to market? And if you walk just that process, you'll be blown away what you discover about how all your systems actually tie together. And that one will work. Like that one, everybody knows how that one works in a decent sized company, right? So in your company, there are these processes that if you really step back at, what does it take to make a business run? You can name a handful, like order to cash is a very, very standard process, right? How do I go from taking the order to putting money in the bank account? It sounds really simple, but it's often kind of complicated, right? You'll touch a bunch of different systems. You'll touch a bunch of sub processes, but in there you can develop this. Here are the minimum data elements. Here's how they're moving, and it becomes very clear. And what falls out of that is a test strategy, an architecture strategy, a bunch of other stuff. Because the truth is, you're never. I mean, this has been my experience. You're never going to get all the upstream app teams to be as good as you should be at environment management if you're in the business of building the integration platform for your company. So if you're in the business of building the integration platform for your company, you are the backbone. You're the spinal column that all the data is passing through, right? So now when you have dev, test, QA, prod, regression, 2 others, right? Most of the other systems will only have 1 or 2. Now you get to provide a valuable service helping to coordinate the disparities in this ecosystem so that people can accurately test things, so that people can build more things, right? This environment management, I wrote a white paper, internal white paper years ago called Environment Management is the GRU, right? Like, if you remember the GRU, he's the thing that eats you in the dark.
Yeah.
And environment management and environment cardinality, like managing the number of environments and what they're for, how they're talking to each other, just managing that at a decent size, like just trying to get that under control and getting your data platform, frankly, to have way more environments than everybody else and be able to control them faster, roll things with CI/CD, do good config management. That's how you get that data platform to be the hero, right? Like, because you become that connective tissue, as well as the place that we really can visualize and understand these end-to-end processes. And if you start your documentation, if you start your efforts with, hey, here's the process, then here are the constituent pieces, right? You build a much better architecture library. People say architecture, and they think a bunch of boxes and computer systems, but architecture around information architecture, process architecture, how do these things actually tie together? You're dead right? Like, the data is just the sort of the bottom of it. But it's some other disciplines, right? I mean, and really, I guess this is the other place where data teams kind of get hosed, right? Because what I just described was the data team building things that look like transactional applications in order to get their job done.
Mm-hmm.
And now you end up with a data team who goes, we don't know how to build apps. Well, as it turns out, if we just built everything with software engineering principles, et cetera, getting the data team to need to build the app is all of a sudden not a big deal. They should be using the same tools the software folks are anyway, right?
Well, yeah, especially as I don't know about you, but what I'm starting to see is more and more quote data apps, right? So data powered applications, which is kind of an oxymoron in a way, because every app is data powered, but using maybe quote bigger systems, more kind of data systems in air quotes. But the feedback loop between, I guess, data and applications is shrinking a lot, right? To the point where I feel like, and I wrote about this in the last chapter of my book, but it feels like the boundaries between data and engineering and even machine learning are just going to shrink and shrink and shrink to the point where I don't know that there will be a distinction. At which point you have to adopt software engineering practices in order for this to work. There's no other way. What are you going to do? Like, is your app team going to adopt the antiquated data practices that you've been using the whole time? I don't think that that's going to work. So,
I think the challenge is that in the huge circle that is software engineering, we see circles that emerge completely inside it. And when they emerge, they think, oh, we are outside of it. The Venn diagram that is software and us has no overlap. But in fact, they're completely contained by it, and they just don't see it yet. And as the years go by, you just start erasing that line, right? Because all the stuff about machine learning, getting a machine learning algorithm into production that does something like truly useful, kind of hard. I've done it, right? We've done it with several, done it at some scale. We did it because it was all software engineering, right? It wasn't like the machine learning part of it is this little tiny sliver. And I think we see that in a bunch. So maybe it's just a generation of SaaS users. I don't know. But you're right. The boundaries are dissolving, but I think it's because they were made up.
It's very, very possible. The more I keep looking at this, the more I feel that that's probably the likely answer to it. And again, and in our book, we do tell, especially smaller teams, like, if you can get an off the shelf tool that satisfies your needs today, focus on that. You don't have a lot of time, but vendors are going to vendor. So, I mean, I'm a vendor, you're a vendor, and we do what we do. We got to sell. So it's like, it is what it is. But at the end of the day, it's just sort of it's the viable law of the universe too. So at some point, but yeah. Oh, awesome. Well, cool. I know we're coming up on time. I want to be respectful of your time. I know you got get some things to do today, but it's been great chatting with you. I feel like we could probably keep going for a while. So
I suspect we could. It was good. It was good to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, probably need to have a round 2 episode. But for people who want to learn more about you and what you're doing, how can they do that?
Go to neuronsphere.io. You can also pip install NeuronSphere right now. We have a free bunch of binaries. You can have an entire local data stack. Trino, Superset, Airflow, our abstraction layer over Airflow, the authoring environment, the templates, everything. Pip install NeuronSphere, and there's a NeuronSphere channel on YouTube. There's some videos. There's some open repositories with tutorial code. So you can download some tutorial starters and then walk through those videos and build an entire data platform locally.
That's impressive. I'm going to go check it out, actually. So
thanks.
Pip install. I'm just making note of that. Cool, man.
Yeah, it's in all the videos. Pip install NeuronSphere. If that's all you do, like, I've won for the day.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for your time, Brian. It's great chatting with you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Yeah, of course.